It was the summer of 1941, a moment of uneasy transition in the air war over Europe. The thunder of the Battle of Britain had faded, but the Channel, that narrow stretch of water separating Britain from Nazi-occupied France, remained a silent battleground. By day, German reconnaissance planes still prowled the skies. By night, the Royal Air Force struck deep into enemy territory, and sometimes simply vanished into the dark. Between June and August of that year, 5 RAF bomber crews disappeared over the English Channel. No distress calls, no wreckage, no survivors. Only the chilling absence that would haunt families, commanders, and historians for decades. Among those missing were men from squadrons based at RAF Waddington in Lincolnshire, Thorney Island near Chichester, and Tangmere, airfields that had become lifelines of Britain's resistance. The missions themselves were not unusual. They were part of the RAF's growing strategy of night bombing, a shift from daylight raids that had proved too costly. In dimly lit briefing rooms, young pilots listened to their orders. Target, Brest Harbour. Objective, disrupt German naval supply lines. The crews were calm, professional, many barely 20 years old, their confidence tempered by routine. Yet each takeoff into the black expanse carried a sense of dread. The Channel beneath, them a graveyard of aircraft already lost to flak, engine failure, or sheer bad luck. On the night of June 23, 1941, a Wellington bomber from No. 9 Squadron lifted off from RAF Honington. Its call sign, L7812. The crew of 6 had flown together for weeks. Pilot Officer Eric Tomlinson, Navigator Sergeant George Hart, and 4 others whose camaraderie masked fatigue. Their mission, strike the docks at Brest, where German battleships Gneisenau and Scharnhorst were reportedly undergoing repairs. Radio logs recorded their takeoff at 23:48 hours. They were expected back by dawn. Somewhere over the Channel, they vanished. At 01:17, a short transmission reached base control. Target sighted, heavy flak. The voice, likely Tomlinson's, was calm. Then silence, no mayday, no garbled cry of distress, only static against the hum of the night. By 03 Yao, when the first returning aircraft reported in, L782 remained unaccounted for. By 05 Zamo, it was officially overdue. The next morning, Coastal Command dispatched a Hudson patrol from RAF Saint-Aval to search the area south of the Isles of Scilly. The weather was clear, but the Channel churned with strong tides. Nothing sighted, read the report. Not a trace, not a slick of oil, not a fragment of fuselage. The sea had swallowed everything. Historically, losses like these were grimly routine. In 1941 alone, more than 100 RAF bombers disappeared without confirmed causes. The Channel, narrow as it was, posed as much danger as the continent beyond. A single engine failure, disorientation in cloud, or navigational error could send an aircraft into the water within minutes. But L7812's disappearance puzzled investigators. There had been no weather front in the area, no known fighter interceptions, and no radar contact from German coastal defenses. In a letter written weeks later, squadron leader Alan Rees noted, "It is as if the sea took them whole. There are no witnesses, no reports. They simply cease to exist." For the families, the silence was unbearable. Letters from the air. Ministry arrived in tidy envelopes, each containing the same carefully worded message. Missing in action, presumed lost. For the wives and mothers who gathered weekly in nearby parishes, the Channel became both a symbol of hope and despair, the final barrier between their loved ones and the truth. As months passed, other squadrons began to lose aircraft in eerily similar circumstances. Pilots returning from raids reported hearing strange static bursts over the radio, jamming perhaps, followed by sudden silence from their wingmen. Coastal stations logged blips that appeared and vanished within seconds, too fleeting to identify. One intelligence officer later described the pattern as like lights extinguished across the water, one by one. Modern researchers have since speculated about the causes: navigational drift, fuel miscalculation, enemy night fighters using new Liechtenstein radar, but no theory fully explains the absence of wreckage. Even with modern sonar sweeps of the Channel floor, these aircraft remain undiscovered, their coordinates lost to time. In the archives of the RAF Museum in Hendon lies a single surviving document about Wellington L782, a flight plan marked routine. The irony lingers. Routine. Yet it became the beginning of one of the RAF's quietest mysteries. The channel that once divided freedom from tyranny had, in this case, claimed its own. And as dawn rose on June 24th, with empty runways stretching into mist, the men of No. 9 Squadron prepared again for another mission, their comrades' fate unspoken, their names already fading into the haze of war. The mystery of L782 would be the first, but not the last. The channel was just beginning to take its toll. The first to vanish had been the Wellington from No. 9 Squadron. Barely 3 weeks later, another RAF crew would follow, this time aboard a Bristol Blenheim of No. 21 Squadron, operating out of RAF Watton in Norfolk. The date was July 17, 1941. The mission, reconnaissance over Cherbourg, a critical port for the German Kriegsmarine. The aircraft, a Blenheim Mackay 4, serial Z7442, was crewed by Flight Lieutenant Harold Hal Tinsley, Pilot Officer Norman Reed, and Sergeant James Foster, an experienced observer. They were to shadow German naval movements along the coast, specifically reports of a new convoy gathering under Luftwaffe protection. At 06:20 hours, the aircraft lifted off under grey skies. Conditions were favourable. Broken cloud at 4,000 feet, a mild westerly wind. Their orders were simple but dangerous. Maintain low altitude, photograph the harbour installations, and avoid contact. They were to report every 30 minutes via encrypted wireless transmission. For the first hour, everything proceeded according to plan. Then, just before 8:00, the crew transmitted a brief message. Fuel low, returning west. It was the last anyone ever heard from them. What followed was confusion. Ground stations at Exeter and St. Evil reported intermittent radio interference, static bursts mixed with faint Morse signals. The Channel radar chain, stretched thin by constant alerts, detected a lone contact halfway between Alderney and Portland, heading northwest. The echo faded within minutes. Whether it was the Blenheim or another aircraft, no one could tell. Coastal command patrols were dispatched, but they found only empty sea. German records captured years later offer a fragmentary glimpse into what might have happened. A report from Jagdgeschwader 2 Richthofen, the Luftwaffe fighter wing stationed near Caen, mentions radar contact with one fast twin-engine aircraft. Altitude 500 meters, disappearing westward into cloud. No engagement was recorded. The wording is careful, even bureaucratic. It suggests they saw the Blenheim, but did not shoot. And yet, by all available evidence, Z7442 never made it home. The Blenheim was a versatile but vulnerable aircraft. By mid-1941, it was already showing its age, too slow to outrun the new German fighters, too light to take sustained damage. Crews knew this. They relied on luck, speed, and the Channel's vast emptiness to shield them from pursuit. Many missions ended with radio silence, forced landings, or narrow escapes. This time, there was nothing. A letter written by a fellow airman, Flight Sergeant David Melrose, captures the mood of the base that day. We waited for Hal's plane until the clouds turned to dusk. The ops room was quiet, no one said a word. When the last log was closed, the room emptied without a sound. Melrose's words mirror the unspoken reality of the RAF in those years. Men vanished as suddenly as they had come, and the war rolled forward, indifferent. Post-war inquiries attempted to retrace the Blenheim's path. In 1948, a French fisherman from Barfleur claimed to have seen an aircraft flying low, trailing smoke, turning north, before disappearing into the fog. His testimony was logged but never verified. Decades later, British and French divers scoured the seabed off Alderney, uncovering several wrecks. None matched the Blenheim serial. The currents of the Channel, shifting and relentless, erase clues faster than time can preserve them. Today, aerial historians suspect that Z7442 may have suffered an engine failure or fuel starvation while returning home. The Blenheim's range was limited, and with low clouds masking the coast, even a slight navigational drift could prove fatal. A descent to sea level for bearings, a failed altimeter, and the sea would have been mercilessly close. Fuel low, returning west. The crew's final message suggests both discipline and resignation, a calm acknowledgement of danger. There was no panic in the tone, no plea for help, just professionalism, ending in silence. For the families, the lack of closure deepened the wound. Harold Tinsley's wife, Margaret, kept his flight cap in a wooden box until her death in 1988. She never remarried. His name, like those of thousands of other missing airmen, is carved into the Runnymede Memorial, panel 33, one among many who have no known grave. And yet, historians continue to probe these stories, not merely to assign causes, but to understand the human cost of the air war. The RAF's official loss report for July 17th lists Z7442 as missing, presumed lost over sea. No mention of combat, no conclusive evidence, just a line in a ledger. But what makes the case haunting is not simply its disappearance, it's the pattern forming behind it. Crews vanishing along nearly identical flight paths, often during clear conditions, without distress or debris. Something, perhaps unseen or unrecorded, was claiming aircraft over the channel. By August, whispers began circulating among bomber groups of dead zones in the channel where radio contact failed and compasses spun erratically. Pilots joked grimly about the grey mouth, the stretch of sea that swallowed planes whole. Whether rooted in superstition or experience, it became a quiet part of RAF folklore. The loss of the Blenheim of No. 21 Squadron reinforced the sense of unease spreading through airfields across southern England. The missions would continue, of course. Duty demanded it. But with every new briefing, the channel seemed to grow wider, darker, and more unforgiving. The next disappearance would come not by day, but under the cover of night, when the moon hung low over the water, and even the bravest crews felt its pull. By late summer of 1941, the war in the air had taken on a grim rhythm. Every night, bombers roared off toward Europe, and every morning the operations room marked who had not returned. The English Channel, once a symbol of safety and separation, had become an invisible frontier of loss. In August, the mystery deepened when not one, but 3 RAF crews disappeared within the span of 6 weeks, each under eerily similar circumstances. The first was a Lancaster from No. 50 Squadron, based at RAF Swinderby in Lincolnshire. The date, August 12, 1942, one of the first major operations following the RAF's adoption of the heavy 4-engine Lancaster bomber. The target was the German-occupied port of Le Havre. The weather was good, moonlight bright enough to reveal the faint shimmer of the channel below. Squadron leader Douglas Wainwright led a crew of 7 aboard Lancaster R5674. At 22:16, their aircraft rolled down the runway, its engines thundering in harmony. "See you at breakfast," Wainwright was heard saying. It was the last anyone would hear from him. At 01:03 hours, Wainwright's aircraft reported reaching the target area. Flak over Le Havre was heavy but sporadic, and several aircraft confirmed bombs on target. Wainwright's Lancaster was seen turning back west, trailing light smoke but maintaining altitude. A few minutes later, the radar operators at Ventnor on the Isle of Wight logged a blip matching the Lancaster's return course. Then, inexplicably, it vanished from their screens. No enemy fighters were in pursuit, no distress call, no wreckage, just a sudden absence. Over the following nights, 2 more aircraft from separate squadrons vanished in similar fashion. A Halifax from No. 35 Squadron and another Lancaster from No. 44 Squadron based at RAF Waddington. Each was last recorded flying home over the channel. Each failed to return. "All presumed lost at sea," read the official communiqué, phrasing that had become tragically common by this stage of the war. The channel in 1942 was treacherous, not only because of enemy patrols, but also due to a less visible danger: mines. The Germans had laid thousands of magnetic and acoustic mines in its shallow waters, while the Allies had responded in kind. Pilots were often briefed to avoid specific zones, but the shifting tides and limited navigation equipment meant these boundaries were little more than estimations. A plane flying too low, perhaps on a return route to avoid radar, risked triggering disaster without ever touching the sea. Still, the absence of debris or oil slicks puzzled even experienced commanders. At Bomber Command headquarters in High Wycombe, the losses were quietly noted but rarely discussed in depth. There was simply no time. But in squadron debriefings, whispers spread among the surviving crews. They spoke of vanishing points, stretches of sea where compasses faltered, radio static grew violent, and even the stars seemed to fade. Veteran navigators dismissed these as nerves or coincidence, yet the unease was undeniable. Flight engineer Arthur Collins, one of Wainwright's colleagues, later wrote in his diary, "We fly the same routes, same altitudes, same nights, but sometimes they just don't come back. It's as if the channel swallows the unlucky ones whole." His entry, found after the war, reflected a sentiment shared by many. In an age before modern radar mapping, the channel's mists and unpredictable winds created disorientation that even the most skilled crews could not always overcome. The Air Ministry launched several small investigations in 1943, hoping to identify any pattern among the missing flights. Reports compared altitudes, weather, radio logs, and even phases of the moon. The only consistent factor was that all aircraft were returning at night, low over water, with fuel running near empty. The possibility of misjudged descent was considered, a fatal dip below the horizon line mistaken for level flight. In darkness, with only faint reflections on the water, even a few degrees of error could mean impact. Controlled flight into terrain, the modern term, had not yet entered the vocabulary, but other clues kept the mystery alive. In 1964, French fishermen dredging nets south of Dieppe recovered fragments of aluminum plating and a single RAF oxygen regulator. The serial number corresponded to a batch fitted to Lancaster R5674, Wainwright's aircraft. Yet despite multiple dives by British and French teams, no complete wreckage was found. The channel's sands shift with every storm, burying evidence under layers of silt within months. Historians today interpret these disappearances as tragic, consequences of a brutal, relentless campaign. Human endurance tested against machinery, weather, and the limits of navigation. But in the moment, to the men of Bomber Command, it felt like something more, an invisible hand of fate, choosing without reason. As the autumn of 1942 approached, the channel's legend grew among pilots. Some began carrying small tokens, a lucky coin, a saint's medal, a photograph, anything to hold fortune's favor on the crossing home. Others avoided even speaking the names of missing comrades before takeoff, as though the sea itself could hear. For the air crews who flew these moonlit missions, the risk was understood, but never fully accepted. "It's not fear," one pilot wrote. "It's the knowledge that over that black water, the sky and the sea are the same color. And once you lose the horizon, there's no coming back." The channel, the silent witness to every flight, had claimed more lives than the enemy that year. And yet, the raids continued. Each one a calculated gamble, each disappearance another unanswered question. By 1943, the RAF had grown stronger, its bombers larger, its formations tighter. But as the war pressed on, the mystery only deepened. The next vanishings would come under clearer skies, and in circumstances even the official reports struggled to explain. By 1943, the Royal Air Force was stronger, bolder, and operating deeper into German-held territory than ever before. Yet the English Channel, only a sliver of water separating Britain from occupied Europe, remained the most perilous stretch of their journey. For every bomber that braved Berlin or Hamburg, the final 100 miles over the Channel could be the deadliest. And for 3 more RAF crews that year, it would be their last horizon. It began with a Lancaster from No. 50 Squadron, flying out of RAF Skellingthorpe, Lincolnshire. On the night of March 22, 1943, Lancaster ED-98, call sign K King, was assigned to a bombing run over the submarine pens at Saint-Nazaire. Its crew, Flight Lieutenant Raymond Lister and 6 men barely out of training, had already completed 4 missions together. The aircraft departed at 21:46 hours, engines steady, navigation flawless. The return route was plotted over the Channel's central corridor, where Allied radar coverage was strongest. At 03:10 hours, radar stations at Beachy Head detected K King returning from the target area at low altitude. Then, abruptly, the signal broke off. No distress call, no explosion seen, nothing. The aircraft had been minutes from safety. Searchlights along the coast swept the waves, but the sea revealed only silence. 2 nights later, another disappearance, this time a Halifax from number 158 Squadron, code NPE. Its mission mirrored K-King's, targeting German ports on France's Atlantic coast. The crew's last message came at 02:37. Crossing the coast now. All well. The words were calm, routine, professional. But the Halifax never reached its base. Within days, reports flooded RAF Coastal Command of phantom radar blips, returns appearing over the channel for seconds, then vanishing. Operators assumed these were echoes or interference from the changing spring weather. Yet, as one observer at RAF polling noted, the pattern was too deliberate. Signals like ghosts crossing home, then gone. By mid-year, with losses mounting, investigators began comparing mission reports. The parallels were chilling. Each aircraft, returning at night, low over calm water, last contact within 30 miles of the English coast. No distress calls, no wreckage. Crews simply erased from the sky. Meteorological data ruled out sudden storms. The Luftwaffe's night fighter claims for those dates showed no matches. German naval records captured after the war mentioned no confirmed shootdowns. So what then was happening in the Channel's darkness? Some airmen blamed navigational drift, the treacherous black hole effect. With no visible horizon, a pilot could easily misjudge altitude, flying lower and lower until the aircraft skimmed the water at full speed. Others suggested that returning aircraft, flying on fumes, might have succumbed to mechanical failure within sight of home. The Channel's cold depth would take them instantly, but one peculiar case deepened the mystery further. On July 14, 1943, a Lancaster from number 619 Squadron was spotted by a Royal Navy patrol boat near the Channel Islands. The weather was clear, the sea calm. Witnesses described the aircraft flying unusually low, barely 200 feet, its navigation lights flickering erratically. Then, without warning, it banked sharply, clipped the surface, and exploded in a sheet of fire. The Navy launched lifeboats immediately, but by the time they reached the area, nothing remained but a scattering of debris. No bodies were recovered. When the patrol commander filed his report, he included a detail often overlooked. No distress signal, no evasive maneuvers. The plane simply dipped and vanished. The crew's actions, or lack thereof, puzzled investigators. Mechanical faults seemed possible, yet the report's final note hinted at something else. Navigation lights appeared to dim simultaneously, as if electrical failure preceded impact. Modern aviation historians reviewing these losses point to the fragile technology of the era: wiring, fuel systems, and altimeters that could fail under strain. Yet, the repetition of these conditions, clear skies, calm seas, and sudden disappearance, keeps the story from settling neatly into the realm of accident. To the men flying these missions, the Channel's reputation grew darker with each loss. They began calling the crossing the Silent Run. Superstition took root in even the most disciplined squadrons. Navigators whispered that certain return routes were cursed, an unlucky bearing or waypoint that drew planes off course. It wasn't official policy, but crews began subtly altering flight paths, adding minutes to already perilous missions, simply to avoid those dead zones. One surviving pilot, Wing Commander Alfred Stone, recalled years later, "The Channel was a graveyard. You'd see the coast of France behind you and England ahead, and for a moment you'd believe you were safe. But that's where men disappeared, the space between seeing home and reaching it." By 1944, Bomber Command had refined its techniques, integrating radar beacons and improved navigation aids. Yet even then, disappearances persisted. Not as many, but enough to keep the legend alive. In the post-war years, sonar teams mapped hundreds of wrecks scattered across the seabed, bent frames of Wellingtons, Halifaxes, and Lancasters lying silent under layers of sand and salt. Most could be identified, a few could not. Among the unidentified remains lie 3 aircraft matching the general dimensions and construction of the missing 1943 crews. None bear visible serial markings, none reveal cause of loss, and so their names remain etched not on gravestones, but on the marble panels of the Runnymede Memorial, airmen with no known grave but the sea. Even today, divers exploring the Channel's wreck fields report the eerie stillness surrounding these sites. The seafloor is littered with fragments of aluminum and glass, their edges dulled by decades. The water moves soundlessly between the fuselage ribs, as though the ocean itself guards their memory. The channel had become both protector and predator, its cold surface reflecting the fragile line between safety and oblivion. And as Allied victory approached, the mystery of the lost crews refused to fade. For even with the tide of war turning, there remained one haunting truth. No matter how close home was, the channel decided who crossed and who did not. The war ended, but the questions did not. In the years following 1945, as Europe rebuilt from ruin, the families of the missing RAF crews waited for answers that never came. Officially, their sons and husbands were listed as missing in action, presumed lost at sea. But the absence of wreckage, the lack of confirmed combat encounters, and the similarity of each disappearance over the English Channel kept the case alive in the shadows of post-war inquiry. In 1947, the Air Ministry established the Missing Research and Inquiry Service, MRES, a small but determined team tasked with tracing the fates of over 42,000 missing RAF personnel. They scoured archives, interviewed witnesses across Europe, and even hired local fishermen and divers to search known crash zones. Yet for these 5 particular crews, the Wellington of No. 9 Squadron, the Blenheim of No. 21 Squadron, and the trio of lost heavy bombers from 1942-43, the record remained stubbornly incomplete. German war diaries, seized during Operation Archive in 1945, offered little clarity. No Luftwaffe claims matched the dates or routes of the missing aircraft. Flak unit reports made no mention of confirmed kills. The Kriegsmarine's own coastal defense logs recorded radar contacts that appeared briefly before fading without engagement. It was as though the bombers had passed through an empty sky and vanished before anyone could react. In 1950, a British naval hydrographic team mapping the Channel floor near Le Havre detected several large metallic anomalies, possible aircraft wrecks. Divers were dispatched, but poor visibility and strong currents made identification impossible. Later expeditions confirmed the presence of twisted aluminum frames scattered across a wide area, suggesting mid-air breakups or post-impact disintegration. However, no serial numbers or squadron insignia were recovered. The sea had erased all trace of identity. Still, some clues emerged from unexpected places. In 1961, a French trawler operating off the Cotentin Peninsula hauled up part of a landing wheel stamped Dunlop, 1941, RAF contract. The piece was corroded but intact enough for analysis. The Air Historical Branch confirmed it matched the type used on the Bristol Blenheim. The location, 35 miles north of Cherbourg, aligned closely with where Flight Lieutenant Harold Tinsley's aircraft had been last recorded. Yet even this discovery yielded no definitive closure. The wheel might have drifted miles from its origin, carried by currents through decades of tide. The press, hungry for wartime mysteries, seized on the story. By the late 1960s, articles in The Daily Telegraph and Flight International speculated on everything from navigational malfunctions to secret operations gone wrong. Some suggested that one or more of the aircraft might have been diverted or downed during unrecorded missions involving Allied intelligence. Theories the Air Ministry quietly denied but never entirely disproved. Others proposed that low-level magnetic interference, caused by the extensive mining of the Channel, could have disrupted the aircraft's compasses and altimeters, leading to controlled descents into the sea. In 1973, a BBC investigative series revisited the disappearances under the title The Channel's Vanished Airmen. One episode featured interviews with surviving members of 50 and 619 squadrons. Their recollections were vivid. You'd hear them on the radio one minute, then static the next, recalled flight engineer Arthur Collins. No explosion, no fire, just gone. You'd fly home thinking they'd made it too, until you saw the empty dispersal bay. The broadcast renewed public interest and prompted a new round of archival reviews. Yet again, no records emerged to fill the gaps. Historians concluded that the disappearances were likely caused by a combination of factors: navigational errors, weather misjudgment, and fuel exhaustion during return flights. But many, even among the experts, admitted privately that these explanations felt too neat, too convenient for so many identical cases. In 1994, 50 years after the last loss, a multinational sonar expedition charting wartime wrecks made a startling find. The remains of a 4-engine bomber lying at a depth of 72 meters, roughly midway between Portsmouth and Le Havre. The structure was remarkably preserved, its wings intact, nose section crumpled but recognizable. A faint marking, R567, could be discerned on one fragment of fuselage. It matched the partial serial of the Lancaster flown by squadron leader Douglas Wainwright, lost in August 1942. But before divers could confirm it conclusively, the wreck was buried again under a massive seabed landslip, triggered by a Channel storm that winter. The sea had reclaimed its secret once more. For the families, each discovery reopened old wounds. Letters exchanged between relatives and the RAF Benevolent Fund reveal an enduring pattern of grief and hope. One, written by Margaret Tinsley in 1975, reads simply, "I only wish to know where he fell. That is all." The Ministry's final report, issued in 1982, concluded, "While certain structural remains in the channel may correspond to missing aircraft, definitive identification is improbable. The nature of the sea floor and corrosion renders recovery unfeasible. It was a bureaucratic full stop, yet not a moral one." Even in the 21st century, search teams continue to map the channel's wartime debris field, hoping for closure. In 2019, sonar imaging identified several uncharted wrecks that may correspond to lost RAF bombers, though the depths make recovery near impossible. As one researcher put it, the channel keeps its dead. And so, the official story ends in uncertainty, a blend of logic and loss. The 5 forgotten RAF crews remain nameless beneath the waves, their aircraft scattered across the seabed. But perhaps their greatest legacy lies not in mystery, but in what they represent. The silent endurance of those who flew, knowing that the path home was never guaranteed. Even now, historians look back on those vanished missions not as isolated tragedies, but as reminders of war's most haunting dimension, the void between knowing and not knowing. For the men who crossed the channel night after night, that uncertainty was the cost of courage. But the story does not close here, because somewhere beneath the restless tides, the final word on their fate may still be waiting. Buried in silt, guarded by the sea, and carried on in memory. They have no graves, only names, carved in cold stone, facing east toward the water that took them. At Runnymede, on the hill overlooking the Thames, the memorial walls bear 20,000 names of airmen who never came home. Among them are the crews of the 5 aircraft lost over the English Channel: Wellington L7812, Blenheim Z7442, and the 3 heavy bombers whose serials fade with the tide. Their stories, long buried in the war's noise, now whisper from the carved marble panels where each name marks not a resting place, but a question that has never been answered. For the families who survived them, remembrance became a lifelong act of faith. Each November, they came with photographs, poppies, and letters yellowed with time. Some stood in silence. Others traced the engraved letters with trembling hands. "This is all we have," one widow said in a 1955 radio interview. "A name. The rest is somewhere beneath the sea." Today, historians still piece together fragments of these stories. The logs, the mission maps, the fragments of aluminum found on trawler decks. Each detail fills another gap in the vast mosaic of the war's air campaign. But the picture will never be complete. The channel remains both witness and accomplice, its floor littered with the relics of courage. The mystery of the 5 forgotten RAF crews is more than a tale of disappearance. It is a reflection of a generation that lived with the unknown, where every takeoff could end in silence, and the line between life and loss was drawn by luck, wind, and machinery. It is also a reminder that not all casualties of war die in battle. Some simply vanish, their fate unrecorded, their sacrifice unseen. Modern research has made extraordinary strides in locating wartime wrecks. Advances in sonar imaging, photogrammetry, and maritime archaeology have identified hundreds of lost aircraft beneath the channel. Yet the sea's floor is vast, shifting, and secretive. Wrecks settle under layers of silt and sand. Identification plates corrode. Even the metal itself becomes indistinguishable from the seabed. As a result, the 5 aircraft that began this story, the ones whose loss seemed to form a pattern, remain among the few that have never been definitively found. In 2007, a British-French survey team searching off the coast of Barfleur detected an object of similar dimensions to a Blenheim bomber at a depth of 68 meters. They took high-resolution scans and sent a small remote vehicle to investigate. The images showed twisted aluminum, an engine cowling, and what appeared to be a gun mount, possibly RAF issue. Yet storms soon after buried the site once again, and funding for recovery was never renewed. The object lies there still, unseen since that brief glimpse of light. For some, this lack of closure is unbearable. For others, it is what gives the story its haunting dignity. They became part of the channel, said a historian at the RAF museum. And perhaps that's fitting. The sea was their last battlefield. Indeed. It's estimated that more than 1,000 RAF and Allied airmen lie beneath those waters, still inside their aircraft, forever on the edge between mission and homecoming. Each new generation rediscovers their absence. Documentaries, memorials, and digital archives attempt to reconstruct their final flights, to trace their paths across that dark expanse of sea. What emerges from these reconstructions is not simply tragedy, but a pattern of quiet endurance. Crews who faced impossible odds with precision, courage, and duty. There were no heroes in their own eyes, just men doing a job, trusting their instruments, and believing they would make it home. And yet the sea had other plans. As the camera pans across Runnymede stone panels, the narrator's voice fades into the wind. They flew through the darkness for freedom and into a silence that endures. The camera cuts to the channel, grey, endless, restless. Waves roll over the coordinates of their last known positions. Somewhere beneath that water lies a fragment of a wing, a cockpit instrument, a nameplate once touched by a pilot's hand. It is tempting to think of the sea as cruel, but perhaps it is simply impartial, a keeper of secrets. The same waters that swallowed these aircraft also carried thousands of soldiers to liberation, ferried wounded home, and bore the weight of history itself. The Channel has never given back what it takes. It only preserves it, in a quiet archive of silt and salt. In the final accounting of the Second World War, the 5 missing RAF crews are not among the famous. Their stories are not in textbooks or celebrated in film. Yet they embody something essential, the countless unknowns behind every statistic, every mission report, every name on a memorial wall. They remind us that history is not just the story of victory, but of those who vanished along the way. As evening light settles over the water, the Channel appears calm once more, but beneath the surface lies a constellation of memory. Aircraft resting like fallen stars on the seabed. Time moves on, tides shift, but the silence remains. And so ends the story of the 5 most forgotten RAF crews lost over the Channel, not with discovery, nor with closure, but with remembrance. They may never be found, but they are not forgotten. The Channel keeps their secret, and their story endures, in the depths, in the records, and in the air still whispering their names.